So, lots of us have heard by now that the government will soon be launching a contact tracing app developed by NHSX and asking everyone to download it. Or maybe you've been avoiding the news so had no idea this was happening. Lots of people, especially queer people, activists, sex workers, have questions and concerns, mostly around privacy. I'm Isidore, I'm the Book 28 librarian, and I've done a little bit of research and made this quick explainer video to let you know the key info. This should help you make an informed decision about whether to download. It's important to remember that this is just my research. I'm not a security expert or a computer scientist, so I've probably made some mistakes. I'll post my sources at the end and link them below, as well as some more places you can go to learn, and I encourage you to follow up. Also, this app is still currently being developed, so its features and what we know about it will definitely change. This information is correct to the best of my knowledge at the beginning of the last week of May in 2020. So, we'll start by clarifying how contact tracing apps work. We'll talk about key issues and concerns, the big one being privacy, but we'll break that down a little bit and look at issues like feature creep. And there are other concerns you might have, simple things like battery life. We'll ask some of the bigger ethics questions, and at the end there will be some resources you can look to for more information and a bibliography of the sources that I used. So, contact tracing is a well-established part of disease control. For example, you might be familiar with it for HIV, where once someone knows they're positive, they think of everyone who might have been exposed and they contact those people to let them know. Then those people can take action before they pass it on. Outside of any app, there's a general plan to put in place a more broader contact tracing system using telephone contact tracing by June the 1st. The idea is that there'll be a call centre you can ring if you have symptoms or test positive, and the call handler would be able to coordinate contacting everyone that you've been in touch with. This system is already in place in Northern Ireland, it's trialling currently in Scotland. University of Nottingham's Professor Keith Neal says that most high-risk exposures for the coronavirus are prolonged close contact, and we tend to know those people's telephone numbers and names. So an app will be just one part of the new test and trace system. The idea of the app is to extend contact tracing to those usually lower risk scenarios that could still have a transmission, but where we wouldn't know the person's name or number. So think of two people who are standing too close in a supermarket queue. But how do these apps work? So, as you can see from this BBC diagram, a simple explanation is that the app detects and records the presence of other app users around it. Then, if one of those people gets infected with COVID, an alert is sent out to all those users who it recorded. We'll dive more deeply into how that works in a moment, but the first point I want to make is that the proposed models for the UK do not use GPS or location information to do their contact tracing. Some other countries' apps do use GPS, and it's true that the NHS might want to ask users for voluntary GPS data in the future for some of its research, but it doesn't use location to do contact tracing, so the app having access to your location is not actually an initial concern. You also don't need to tell the app your name or email. Matt Burgess from Wired UK says, within the app there is one central question. How are you feeling today? If you feel unwell, you tap on the prompt and are asked whether you have a high temperature and a persistent cough. Both are defined within the app. You are also asked to select which date the symptoms started. And I'll just add as well that depending on your answer, you might be directed to a call centre who could arrange a test for you. You will also likely be asked to provide the beginning of your postcode so that the NHS can track overall spread of the virus. So we can see a little more detail on how this all works in this Guardian graphic. Your phone sends out a Bluetooth signal that is a personal identifier. This is basically going to be a random string of numbers. So instead of Isidore's phone, mine could be called phone number 12345. It's sending out this identifier the whole time that I had the app running and my Bluetooth on. Then I pick up the random identifiers that pass within the range of my Bluetooth, and my phone collects a list of those identifiers. Everyone's random identifier will change once a day in the current app as it's being designed by NHSX. For apps that use the Apple and Google Open Protocol, that identifier changes every 15 minutes. Later, you can tell the app if you have symptoms, and all the data from your phone is sent to a central server. That server then sends out an alert to those identifiers from the list of people you've passed. I'm going to pick out 3 issues with this process right away: the use of Bluetooth, symptom data, and a central server. The first 2 of those issues relate to how well the app might work. So firstly, you need to have the app open and Bluetooth switch on whenever you go out and about, and there have been reports from the Isle of Wight trial that this really drains the battery. Secondly, you can't currently enter your test result, just your symptoms. So this is one way in which the UK's model is different from a lot of other countries, so they might change that in a future update. For now, people acting maliciously could put in bad data, or someone who wants to get a test and thinks it will be faster through the app might tell it they have symptoms when they don't. It also means that if someone then tests negative, there's not necessarily currently a way to go back and tell all the people who were notified. A positive side is that you could argue that someone's test status is a more sensitive piece of medical information that we might not want stored in the app, and it also means that alerts can go out more quickly when people have symptoms rather than them waiting for the test to come back. So the other concern was with that central server. You can think of it as a database that the phone was uploading data to. If we're using a contact tracing app, we need to share a few pieces of information between phones. We're going to need to share who's reported symptoms, their list of identifiers, some way of analysing the risk, some way of sending alerts out to phones connected with those identifiers, even if that's in an encrypted or anonymized form. You can basically do this one of 2 ways. Either with one central database that all the phones give all their information to, or a decentralized database where each phone gives just enough information to do matching and alerts from the phone itself. Most countries that have rolled out an app have used that second decentralized model based on a free framework that Apple and Google have put together. As we can see in this BBC diagram, different things happen when you send out an alert in the 2 models. In the centralized model, the phone sends its info to the central database, including codes from the phones that it passed. That database then does the contact matching, the risk analysis, and sends out the alerts. In the decentralized model, the phone only sends its own identifier to the server, and it downloads part of the database in return. Then it does the matching, analysing, and alerting all from the phone itself. NHSX say the main advantage to a central database is that it's easier to update and improve, that it will generally run faster and smoother, and that having the data in one place will also help the NHS track overall patterns in the virus spread, which could in turn help control the virus and ease lockdown. Also, the NHSX app is open source, so the code behind the app is available for anyone to view on GitHub. They've set up an independent ethics advisory board to help them review the risks and the benefits of different models and features for the app. The critics say that a centralized database is a big pile of data that could be abused, whereas splitting it up lowers the fallout of a leak or an attack. In response to these criticisms, Community Secretary Robert Jenrick has said, "If we need to change our app, we will do so. So there is still a chance that we'll move over to a decentralized model." So, thinking further, other things to think about. This idea of some kind of list of our contacts, something that we'll talk about called feature creep, conditions that could be tied to having the app, anonymous versus pseudonymous, and the question of will it actually work. So we'll start with this idea of a list. In the Isle of Wight trial, some unencrypted data was found on phone handsets that could let law enforcement agencies or hackers know when 2 or more people met. However, that particular security flaw has been caught and will be fixed before a national rollout. There's still a fear, though, that if there are more security flaws, even if someone couldn't learn the identity of who you'd been with, that they might still see your patterns across a day of when you were alone, when you were with groups, when you spent a long time with one person. So you can reflect if, as an LGBTIQ+ person, or for any other reasons, you might have concerns about that. The next is this idea of feature creep. So when you download it, the app will come with a certain set of features that you can sign off on and be happy with. But as it updates, more could be added that you might not notice or feel so happy about. This is something we've seen in India. Their contact tracing app started with just contact tracing. Theirs use a combination of GPS and Bluetooth, but it has since added features like an e-pass system and information bulletins. So the more things that you get from an app, the more there's an increased pressure to download it. However, the official NHSX website says that anyone can delete the app whenever they want, and they've made the code open source and available for anyone to view on GitHub. Features they might consider adding in the future, like GPS location, would be added transparently, with users asked if they wanted to opt in. So you might not be worried about this if you feel confident in the Independent Ethics Advisory Board and the transparency of new features that could be added. However, concerns about feature creep link to worries about things being made conditional on you having the app. In India, their app started as optional, but is becoming increasingly necessary as different organisations, including government ones, state that you have to have it installed to use their services. And this is in a country where, according to one study, only 24% of the population has access to smartphones. So it's worrying to think that we could be asked to download the app to, say, go into a shop or back to our workplace, especially if in the future the app contains a feature like displaying your current test status. Then, related to this idea of feature creep, we have questions about where our data will end up. In Australia, part of the contract of the app is that it will be deleted along with all its data at the end of the crisis. Security researchers from our Isle of Wight trial have called for new legal protections that stop officials using the data for something else or storing it for longer than necessary. But others have argued this is already in place here. Health Secretary Matt Hancock has said we don't need that because the Data Protection Act will do its job and that the data is anonymous. NHSX says that the anonymous data collected by the app will only ever be used for NHS care, management, evaluation and research and not be stored for longer than 28 days. But there's been a lot of debate about whether NHS officials are right to use the word anonymous or whether that's misleading. Michael Veal, a UCL lecturer in digital rights and regulations, points out that it's more of a pseudonym. It's not that my data has no name attached, it's just that instead of my name, Isidore, it will be my random identifier, number 12345, and that identifier will change every day. However, if you can link me to my identifier, then my data is no longer anonymous, and that might also be a worry with feature creep. So our final question is, will it actually help? Like most things with this pandemic, I think no one knows all the answers because this is so new and there are so many factors to think about. We can only make an educated guess. We've already mentioned some of the reasons why it might not be effective, and another concern from the Isle of Wight trial was that the app might not be working well on old and aging smartphones. NHS advisors say that for the app to be really useful, we need about 60% of the population to download it. As of May 18th, evidence from Singapore said that around 20% of people there had downloaded their tracing app, and in Australia, about 25% of the population had, which is way below the number advisors ask for. However, supporters point out that in the Isle of Wight trial, and now the Isle of Wight was partly chosen because it has a relatively elderly population, download numbers were already close to half of its population by the 18th of May. And others argue that even small amounts of data are still somewhat useful, if not as reliable. NHSX say that a contact tracing app could play an important and useful role in the test and trace phase of the pandemic, and NHS officials have said that an app could be an important part of beating the pandemic. So, putting all these things together, you might want to download the app, even if you have concerns, especially if you feel like they've been addressed by the time it's released. You could see this as part of data altruism, giving away a little bit of your personal health data to help research and keep track of the virus. If you believe that an app will be part of a good way of controlling the virus and ending lockdown sooner, you could see this as part of that. So some key questions you might want to answer first are, do you feel certain about what the data will be used for, how long it will be kept, and are you okay with both those answers? Are you confident that feature creep will not be a problem, either because there are protections against it in place, or because you're sure that you'll be able to know about and consent to any new features? Do you feel that your data is safe, or that the risks are minimal if it's ever not? And lastly, do you generally feel that you understand how the app works and what's happening with your data? If not, it might be time to go and have another look at some useful resources. So some that I recommend, first of all, Mozilla. They're the not-for-profit open internet corporation who make the Firefox browser. They have loads of resources on privacy and cybersecurity, and they have a good track record of making events queer-friendly and focused. BBC News has a webpage for explainers, and those contain some of the simplest graphics and videos about current issues in the news. Wired UK have been doing a lot of cutting-edge research, mostly from Matt Burgess, their cybersecurity reporter. Full Fact are an independent fact-checking charity. They've got a special page dedicated to COVID news where they examine claims from across UK news outlets and social media. You can also go to the NHSX website to see their official updates, releases, and FAQs about the app. So, I'd just like to give a couple of credits here. The snail icon that I used was by Alex Muranev from the Noun Project, and all the other icons were by Denis, also from the Noun Project. Those were all used under a Creative Commons license, and if I've missed any attributions or made any mistakes, you can message me on Twitter at book28library or email me at book28.library@gmail.com. Finally, here's a bibliography of the specific articles I took quotes and data from. I'll also put links to these underneath the video, and I really recommend you go and read them for yourself. I would love to have some conversation start on this. If you have criticisms, other thoughts, if you just want to keep talking about this, feel free to reach out on Twitter or so.